got one last question for you, Duncan, before we before we leave you alone for this for this Sunday afternoon, and that's that. So for people who perhaps haven't met you directly, you are a champion and an educator on the topic of autistic spectrum disorder, and about 10 years ago, you released a fascinating series of videos, and last night I watched them again, and they were on the
About 10
subject.
years since I watched them, so not a word of them. It's probably all lies.
Well, I have to say I was absolutely I was truly fascinated, and actually it got me thinking about my own career as a musician, actually, and how it has developed and how I have developed and changed over the course of the last 10 years. And I wonder how your relationship with ASD has changed over the course of these last 10 years, and how you feel it has continued to shape your development as a musician.
Well, I think that's a very telling question, a very interesting question. And I mean, it was only half jokingly that I sort of was a little bit um, shy of discussing the films from nearly 10 years ago. I haven't watched them for a long time, but I think it's fair to say that I would do it very differently now. I would probably speak very differently on a lot of issues. Some would remain the same, but yes, life is a journey. And we all change constantly. I mean, the amount I've changed over the last 20 years as a musician since I left college, and the amount I've changed over the last 10 years as a musician. And similarly, my understanding of my own autism has continued to develop and change as I've learnt to work with myself rather than against myself. I think it's a long-standing journey of getting to know yourself. It's 20 years since I was diagnosed, over 20 years since I was diagnosed with autism. And actually this year I was going to do quite a lot of talking about that journey since then. So you've asked me a topical question. This year I haven't been able to talk to anyone about it because these events haven't happened, but that will come. And it's interesting that, yes, it's almost a decade since I made those films, which were done for some organisations who wanted their employees to be educated on what it was like to live with autism. So I was brought in to deliver those, that as a sort of training thing. And it obviously it took me a long time to deal with the issues of my diagnosis. I'd been living with autism since I was a child. I just didn't know it, of course. I was in my early 20s when I had a breakdown and eventually I was diagnosed. But having said that, learning to live positively with myself and engage with my difficulties as well as my strengths wasn't, that was a new host of challenges which wasn't accomplished all in 5 minutes. And even after 10 years of that, when I made those films, there was still a long way to go, and there still is a long way to go. So that journey has continued to unfold. I think it's very difficult to disentangle autism from me, because although I'm a person, of course, far beyond that, there are going to be aspects of how my life has been shaped that have been affected by the problems and the particular difficulties and the particular strengths that maybe have resulted from my being autistic. And I think coming to terms with all that and coming to be at peace with myself as I am, and at peace with some of the elements which maybe are more problematic and complex as a result of that autism, and finding the ways in which that weaves into my identity and strands in which it causes problems on an everyday basis, and learning how to anticipate those, respond to them, work with them when they arise. That's a lifelong learning journey. And certainly over the last 10 years, I've become far more aware of where I struggle and things in my lifestyle which I need to modify to cope with the levels of stress, the levels of sensory bombardment, struggling with the overload on the senses which often comes with autism, and things which in my younger years I tended to think, stuff it, get my head down and get on with life regardless. As I've grown older, it's been easier to actually ease off that accelerator and to actually reflect and to actually work with myself as I am. I've always said that I had forgotten my condition at my peril, that I had to constantly stay in touch with who I was and embrace it rather than trying to live in spite of it, live with it rather than in spite of it. I've always said that, but actually in recent years, I've come to learn how to do that far more effectively, and I'm still learning.